Okay guys, hear me out. What if Lewis Hamilton goes to Ferrari? I am still absolutely flabbergasted at the news that I woke up to this morning. I had gone to bed last night at approximately 1:45 in the morning, and I had been scrolling endlessly through Twitter for about half an hour, seeing all of the rumors from the Italian media that Lewis was going to Ferrari. And I was like, this already happened back in the summer and nothing came of it. So I was like, oh, I'm just gonna wake up tomorrow morning and it's just all gonna be another joke. But then I woke up this morning and it was like, no, this is actually happening. Rachel Brooks is outside of the Mercedes headquarters reporting that Toto has told the team that Lewis is leaving. And everybody was losing their damn minds. This is one of the main struggles of living on the west coast of Canada, is when any big signing happens, it's usually in the middle of the night. And I can get up for a race from time to time that early, but I'm not going to be spending all night waiting for news to drop. And when news drops, it's usually out of the blue. So you kind of miss out on stuff sometimes. But we got to wait for several hours this morning to see if it would be official. And eventually it was. And I still cannot believe that is happening. Insane. Oh my god. I am so excited for the 2025 season now. And it's gonna be rough, I think, as a Charles fan. But we'll see how he does. I think it'll be a good benchmark for him to see what he can do next to one of the GOATs of F1. It's going to be a massive battle between the two of them for who can get a championship there if their Ferrari decides a car good enough. So, oh man, it could get spicy and I'm very excited. Thank you. Thank you, Ferrari. Thank you, Fred Vasseur. Thank you, Lewis. I cannot wait. And then this year, having to go through the whole year driving for Mercedes when you know he's leaving for Ferrari, it's going to be so dramatic. Then we're gonna, oh my god, okay, I gotta stop. It's been a wild day, and through all of this I've had to like try and do month end or not even month end, year end for my company. So I'm just like trying to get work done while this is all happening. It's just impossible. God, it's hard. It's hard out here. Anyways, now that I've kind of given my little spiel on that, I am a little mad at myself because I procrastinated all week on making this video. So sadly, my prediction video will not account for the wildest driver transfer of all time, somehow more so than the Oscar Piastri one from a couple years ago. Insane in the membrane. But I actually am kind of happy that I did procrastinate because it allows me to do a full analysis of how the dominoes are going to fall from this move, because that's the thing that we see with silly season is like things usually stay the same unless one out of the blue thing happens and then everyone moves everywhere. It's like a mad scramble during the music stopping for musical chairs, like and so Lewis kicking Carlos out of that Ferrari seat is just going to cause a whole new series of events. So it is time for my predictions for the 2025 driver lineups. Obviously, to start off my predictions, we're talking about Ferrari, and it is incredibly clear who will be driving here because we have had both contracts announced within the past week, and that is Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. Cannot believe it still. If I were to talk about the move here, I think for Charles, he was told that they would be signing Lewis before he confirmed his new contract, so he's obviously okay with the fact that Lewis will be driving against him. I think he will see it as an opportunity to see where he's at against a 7-time world champion, and I think he will really value the experience that Lewis can bring to that team, especially if Lewis decides to bring Bono with him, because Bono's experience with being a race strategist, I think, will help that team a lot. So I'm sure Charles is kind of happy about that, but I think it will definitely add a lot more stress on him. I think Lewis is a much better driver than Carlos is, and Charles barely managed to beat Carlos twice, and Carlos beat him once in the 3 years that they were together. So we'll see how it goes. Lewis, on the other hand, I think for him, he probably saw the writing on the wall at Mercedes and was like, this car is not going to be good for the next 2 years. It's not going to be able to catch up to the Red Bull. And going into the 2026 regulations, I don't know how good they'll be then either. And I think it's basically a 50-50 toss-up between the two teams. But I think Lewis probably saw how well Ferrari was doing at the end of the 2023 season and thought, I think they have a little bit more upside to them at the moment. Plus, I want to drive for the team in red because everybody's a Ferrari fan. Even if they say they're not, they are a Ferrari fan. And Lewis is included in that. And so I think that is probably why he decided to make those decisions. And plus, just to do it on the football transfer day is just so funny. It's just like, no, you little tiny football players can do your little transfers around in your little teams. No, I'm gonna drop the biggest bombshell of all time. So the fact that Lewis is joining Ferrari means there is a space opening up at Mercedes. And this actually was probably the hardest one for me to think of a person who would go in that spot. I think a lot of drivers would want it, but I think it really depends on what Mercedes want. And my thoughts with it are, they have a fantastic young driver by the name of Kimi Antonelli coming up the development ranks. And he's driving an F2 in 2024. So my thoughts are, if he wins in that first season, I think they're going to want an additional year for him to be a reserve driver and get used to the world of F1 in that respect first. We've seen this a lot more frequently with drivers, specifically Oscar Piastri, and I think it seems to serve the drivers a bit better, although with the F2 cars being much more similar to F1 drivers now, I don't know if there's going to be as big of a gap between the two anymore. So maybe Kimi could go directly into that seat going into 2025. But I don't fully see Mercedes taking that risk. Now, the other good driver that could go there that I personally would love to see is Alex Albon. Albon's great friends with George. It could be a Mercedes 2.0. They have the same kind of friendship from their youth situation. And for that reason, I think Toto might not want that. Plus, I think putting Alex in there is more of a long-term signing. And I think if Mercedes' goal is to put Kimi in that seat eventually, I think they're going to want something a little bit shorter term. So that brings up 4 drivers for me. I think that it could be Daniel Ricciardo. This is if Daniel's season in the AlphaTauri goes well, and if Red Bull decide not to put him into their car for the 2025 season. I think this one is pretty slim, but I feel like Daniel back in the day probably would have jumped at the chance to drive for a Mercedes. But I don't know if that's what he really wants anymore, but this is a possibility that I kind of had in my head just because he's also pretty close with George. My other thought was, what if they really want to do a short-term thing and sign a driver to like a 1-year deal? And so possibility for this would be to go back to Valtteri Bottas. They are quite familiar with Valtteri, and he would immediately be able to slot into that team. He's also very familiar with signing those 1-year contracts because that's all he had while he was at Mercedes. But ultimately, I just don't really know if Valtteri's really committed to F1 anymore. I felt like the past couple years he's kind of lost interest in it a bit and seems to be much happier going around the world biking with his girlfriend Tiffany. And so I don't really know if this is in the cards for him. The other thought here could be a Nico Hülkenberg, which if Mercedes wanted to do some goodwill, give Nico the seat for a year and help him get his first podium in F1, I think that would be an incredible story and some good PR after this whole situation. But I feel like that's a bit of a long shot and would only be the case if Valtteri declined and they really wanted only a driver who would sign like a 1-year deal. So considering all of those people, my head just kept going back to one man. And that man is Fernando Alonso. I just know that this is going to happen because anytime there is any kind of drama in F1, Fernando's involved. He is such a shit disturber, and I just think that this coming year, I have a feeling that the Aston Martin isn't going to be as good as it was in 2023. And you can check out my prediction video for the season in the little icon up above. But if that happens, I think Fernando once again is going to be looking for other options, and he is not one to ever think of the burnt bridges behind him whenever he makes a team change. And he always seems to last about 2 years at any team he drives for. So I just can see this easily happening. Plus, I think Mercedes will want the good press. They'll want a more experienced guy coming in there. And I think Fernando probably has about the time frame that Mercedes will be looking for so that he can drive there and then prepare it for Kimi Antonelli to come in a few years later. Just the more I think about it, the more this just makes sense to me. And yeah, I've become too used to the shenanigans of Fernando Alonso. And then obviously the other seat in Mercedes is George Russell because he has a deal there. And I don't think he has any reason to leave currently, especially since his main competition has decided to leave. And so George could consider himself moving into that number one seat or pleading and praying that that is the case, but I think Fernando coming in is going to once again ruin those dreams for George. Now, with Fernando signing with Mercedes, that opens a seat up at Aston Martin. And this was another one that I was kind of like, what could happen here? Obviously, Lance Stroll is going to stick around at Aston Martin. I've seen some people think that he's going to leave and join Aston Martin's endurance racing team, but I don't know. I think people are just pleading and hoping for that to happen, but I just don't think it ever will. As long as Lance still wants to do F1, I think Lance will still have that seat, and I haven't really seen any hints that he is unhappy with his job. So I think he's going to stick around. And I think whoever comes into that team is going to be someone who wants to be a number one driver. So I kind of thought about Carlos Sainz a little bit, but I think there's just a much more obvious choice for Carlos, and I don't know that he would want to sign for Aston Martin. My other thought was Felipe Drugovich, but as the years go on, the more I feel like he's going to be a Nick de Vries as opposed to any of the other younger drivers coming in as champions of F2. Another potential option at Aston Martin could be Yuki Tsunoda based on his Honda connections, but I don't know if he's experienced enough for them to give him the seat. I think they want a driver in there that they have a good benchmark for and can know how good that car actually is. And I think with Yuki, you don't really know for sure if he is driving to the limits of the car. So I think that is why Yuki will not go there. And then I also thought of Daniel Ricciardo, once again, if Red Bull decides not to move him up to the main seat, but I just think that's unlikely. So I'm left with a couple people who are quite familiar with the Aston Martin team, and that is Nico Hülkenberg and Sergio Perez. And I just think that Sergio makes the most sense here. I was thinking going into 2025 before Lewis made this move that Sergio probably would be out of F1, but thinking about it, I think teams would really value the knowledge that he gained at Red Bull, especially since they've been so dominant. I think Sergio really loved his time at that team and was sad to have left. And so I think if Fernando leaves there, I think he would love to go back to a place that he felt comfortable in. And it seems like that team wants someone a bit more experienced in that seat next to Lance Stroll. So I think that makes the most sense. I'm not loving this choice for me, but I just don't really feel like any of the other drivers really make sense here. So that's what I'm going with. I think Sergio going to Aston Martin is more so because he is losing his seat at his current place than anything else. So Yes, taking his seat at Red Bull next to, obviously, Max Verstappen, I have Daniel Ricciardo. This has been pretty clear to me ever since Daniel took to that AlphaTauri seat midway through 2023. And I think this just makes the most sense all around. He's very close with Max. I think he's at a place in his career where he won't be as competitive and fighting for the championship, but he'll be good enough to qualify well and get the points that Red Bull needs to get the constructors. I think he's just well loved at that team, and I think it's a good fit for him as a person, and I think he just wants to return to something familiar after bouncing around a little bit the last few years. The other thoughts I had for the Red Bull seat were Liam Lawson, but I think Red Bull have learned their lesson about putting rookies in there too quickly, even though Liam's had 5 races in F1. And my other thought was maybe Carlos Sainz would go there, but apparently Max and Carlos really butted heads back when they both drove for Toro Rosso. I don't know if I see that happening. And I don't think they want to deal with both Jos Verstappen and Carlos Sainz Sr. I think it is a recipe for trouble. Throughout all of this, I really don't think Yuki has a chance to get that seat. Even if Yuki does really well in 2024, I just think Red Bull have fully come to the conclusion that Yuki doesn't have the temperament to handle the stress at that seat. I think they're happy for him to stick around AlphaTauri and help develop that car, but I don't think they really think of Yuki as a driver that can take Checo's place. So, with Daniel moving up to the main Red Bull team, there is now a spot open at the team formerly known as AlphaTauri, because I refuse to call it by the incredibly corporate name that they have decided to give it. And how F1 has decided that calling a team Visa Cash App RB is bringing less to the sport than Andretti. Please answer me that, F1. I think this driver transfer is pretty clear, and it's going to be Liam Lawson taking Daniel's seat there to partner up Yuki. With Liam Lawson coming in, that kind of ends that set of musical chairs for those teams. The other consequence of Lewis signing at Ferrari, and that is Carlos Sainz leaving. As you've kind of seen, I think Carlos has a lot of different opportunities that he could go with, but there has been rumors going around for quite a while now that Carlos is going to be signing at Audi when they come in 2026. And while I think this is probably a year earlier than he would have wanted to do this move, I think he will sign with Sauber or Stake, another corporate name. I'm so pissed off about it. Getting him settled in there before the new engine regs come, I think that would be a good move for him, even though he'll probably struggle there for a couple years before he has a chance to do something. The other potential options I see at Sauber are Nico Hülkenberg, because he is German, and I think that Audi are probably wanting to put someone German in there if they can, and then also just them deciding to hang on to Valtteri Bottas if they don't want to make any changes. But ultimately, I stuck with Carlos, and then in his partner's seat, I put Théo Pourchaire. Théo's had 3 seasons in F2. He's moving over to Super Formula for the 2024 season, and if things go well there and he's doing reserve driver duties for Sauber and getting in those practice sessions, I think Théo has shown that he can be a consistent driver and definitely became less aggressive over the course of that F2 season that he won. So I think they'll finally be ready to put him into that second seat there and partner a more experienced driver in Carlos Sainz. And I think that will be a lineup that Sauber and Audi would be happy to carry for the next few seasons. So that kind of sorts out that situation. I obviously have both Valtteri and Joe leaving Sauber. Valtteri, I think, is going to decide to retire. This has been, as I said earlier, this has been kind of how I've been feeling about him for the past little while. I just think that his time in F1 has kind of come to a natural end. Joe, on the other hand, I was going back and forth on, and so I was thinking that he might go to Haas, I think he would be a driver that would bring in a lot of money for them. And so that might be something that they would want after a couple seasons of not having a paid driver. But I think with that MoneyGram sponsorship, I think they're probably getting enough right now to get by. So I just don't think that Joe's shown enough in his 2 and soon to be 3 seasons of F1 for them to sign him. So my other thoughts again were Valtteri Bottas, and maybe even Esteban Ocon. I think that could be a potential choice if they wanted someone a little bit younger. But for me, for Haas, I think it's become very clear that Ollie Behrman is going to be one of the drivers there. Haas were super impressed by his solo practice session in 2023. I think he has done very well in F2 in his rookie season, and they apparently, I feel like it was lost in all of the Lewis news, but apparently Haas has decided to put him in 5 practice sessions in 2024. So I think this is just a very clear sign that they're looking to put him in that car for the 2025 season. So I have him in there. And with a very young driver like that, they're going to want someone a little bit older to kind of mentor him. And so I just came to the decision that Nico Hülkenberg was going to stick around at Haas. I think that Nico is a fantastic qualifier, and I think this will continue into 2024. While Nico might have talks with some of the other teams that have empty seats, I think ultimately none of them are going to sign him, and between the option of not being an F1 and being an F1, I think he's going to stick around in that Haas team, even though he was very frustrated with them at times in 2023. So sadly, that means that Kevin Magnussen will be out of F1 again. I think it was a great story that first season he came in, getting that pole for them, and I think that'll be something he'll always remember. But he just hasn't impressed in 2023, and with them going more in the Nico direction for the car setup, I think his time is going to be coming to a close in F1. So obviously I mentioned Esteban Ocon being a potential driver for Haas and him ultimately not signing there, but I think Esteban will be looking around because I think he will be dropped by Alpine in 2025. Esteban is kind of the one remaining thing from all of the chaos of the past few seasons at Alpine. He's kind of the reason that they lost both Fernando and Oscar Piastri at that team. There might be a little bit of resentment there, and I also think that with his relationship with Pierre, I think that's going to sour in 2024, and I think between the two of them, I think they've probably been fed up with Esteban's shtick, and so I think they're going to drop him. I think Pierre will stick around there. For a moment I was thinking he could go to Mercedes, but as I said earlier, I think that would be more of a long-term signing, and I don't think that's what Mercedes want at the moment. So I think Pierre will stick around Alpine, even with all of the musical chairs going on, but I think he can see that he could become a number 1 driver there, and if they are able to improve in any way in that car, he has a good opportunity. So I think that Alpine will finally decide to put one of their own development drivers into the second seat at Alpine. So I have Jack Doohan joining the team for 2025. There's a slight chance it could be Victor Martins as well, especially with the French connection, but I think Jack is a little bit less hot-headed. And I think he has had a lot more development time in that car and is a lot more prepared for a seat. And so I think that is the signing that is going to happen. I think Alpine will have learned their lesson from what they did to Oscar. And so I don't think they're going to let another fantastic driver walk away from them by not giving him a seat. Speaking of teams signing a young driver, next up I have Williams. And I think Alex Albon is going to stay here, even with all of the hype around him and all of the opportunities at other teams. Oh my god, and I didn't even mention that he could probably go to Aston Martin. Shoot. Crap. I'm kind of doing this on the fly, as you can tell. And Albon, I think with James Vowles coming in that team, I think the trajectory of Williams is starting to gain momentum. He keeps talking about how he's not really building for 2024 or 2025. He's building for 2026. And Albon is young enough that I think that if he sees the thing through, it could go quite well for him going into the new regs. So I think he's going to stick around. And yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence about that one as well. But because initially I was really debating before the Lewis signing, obviously, whether he would go to Ferrari. I think he's just going to stick around. And in the car next to him, I struggled with this one as well, but I think they would jump all over the opportunity to sign an exciting young driver. And so I think they will put Kimi Antonelli in that seat. I think Mercedes are going to want this to happen. And as much as I said that they would prefer to have him be a development driver, I think the better alternative to that would be to put him in a different team seat. I'm sure that Williams could probably negotiate a better deal for the engines by doing this. And I think it would be a good benchmark to also see how he is against Alex, who is very established there. Logan could potentially get signed there again, but I just haven't seen enough from Logan. And even though I do think Logan will be better there in 2024, he barely hung on to that seat. And if there's a better option out there, I think Williams will take it. So those are my driver predictions for 2025. Wait, I'm missing a team, aren't I? Oh yeah, McLaren. The only team that will not be making a change going into 2025 because they're boring and they wanted to lock down their drivers before either of them could jump at the chance of driving for Mercedes. I think that's 100% what happened. I think Zach knew what was going to happen, and so he made sure to lock both of his drivers down so they were not tempted to leave. Silly old McLaren being very boring, keeping a very good young driver pairing in Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. So those are my driver predictions for 2025. I'm feeling pretty good about some of the choices I have made there, some of the other ones not so much, and so we will see at the end of the year how I do. I will maybe do a reaction to this prediction video at the end of the year. I feel like some people did that this past year, but without any driver transfers, it wasn't all that good. But I think it'll be interesting to see what I thought would happen and what actually happens with the most insane driver silly season of all time. And there's only been one movement so far, but it has been the movement. Oh my god, I can't believe everything that has happened. Make sure to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, and let me know where you think every driver will end on this game of musical chairs. And did any of you see the Lewis to Ferrari signing happening? I know we kind of had rumors about it back in the summer, but that all seemed to be a joke, and it's no longer a joke. Can't believe it's not April Fool's.